interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. Most obnoxious blowhard in America.
Just walk yourself off that stage. Enjoy a nice meal.
All right, you just heard there, and those are really just some of the fiery moments at the debate. There were a lot of them. Here with us now is Bill McGinley, former White House cabinet secretary under the Trump administration, also principal of Vogel Group. Bill, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, you know, it's here on News Nation, so I'm saying it's one to watch, but it truly was one to watch. There was a lot of back and forth last night. To you, was there a clear winner before we talk about a loser?
Look, I think that each of the candidates really kind of went after the agenda and action items that they needed to do on the debate stage last night. Everybody from former Governor Chris Christie attacking President Trump, but also Vivek Ramaswamy sticking to his style. I thought Ron DeSantis had a very good night, one of his best debate performances. And it was clear that the former Governor Nikki Haley and former UN ambassador really was kind of the target of a lot of the attacks last night, which I think reflects her recent rise in the polls. And that's something that if you're going to actually become the alternative to President Trump, you have to survive and actually thrive in that type of environment.
All right, you know, well, Bill, speaking of Trump, obviously, you know, we know he is leading far and away in the polling right now. He loves to call people losers, or he did at one point. What about the other side of this? Did anyone stand out to you as maybe being the obvious loser last night?
Look, I think whenever they kind of descend into the personal attacks, everybody loses. I think one of your prior guests said, you know, the people of Iowa, the people of New Hampshire, South Carolina, the Super Tuesday states, right now are really suffering under the Biden economics plan that's resulted in record inflation, high interest rates, and everything else that's really choking off family budgets and strangling the small business economy that has really been the engine of job growth in America. And so when you waste the time on stage, that limited amount of time going after the other candidates instead of telling the American voter how you're actually going to right this ship and that you actually have an understanding of the problems that they're living through on a daily basis right now, I think it's a missed opportunity. I thought Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis really laid out their record and actually defended it quite well. I thought Vivek Ramaswamy had a really good moment at the end of the debate when he actually talked about health care and saying that it's more like sick care as opposed to health care. I thought that was a very effective line and showed that he has an understanding of some of the challenges in the healthcare system. So I thought that was one of his best moments.
Yeah, that line certainly stood out to me as well. And you really bring up a good point, because there were many times when I wished we did have time to actually hear, you know, some of the policies, some of the ideas that these candidates would move forward with. But it kind of did, you know, many times end up being that back and forth. Obviously, we know it's all about whittling things down. Who do you think is next to drop out? Do you think we'll see that happen before the end of the year?
I don't think you're going to see it happen before the end of the year. I think each of these candidates, especially the DeSantis campaign and also Ramaswamy and others, have made a substantial investment in Iowa. Nikki Haley is beginning to spend time and resources there. Chris Christie and Nikki Haley are both really vested in New Hampshire, which will happen about a week after the Iowa caucuses. And then, of course, Nikki Haley being the former governor of South Carolina, I don't see her dropping out anytime before South Carolina. I think the real pivotal time next year for the presidential primary, where you're going to begin to see people really reevaluate whether there's a path forward, is going to be Super Tuesday, because that requires so much substantial resources, both in terms of personnel and money, to actually make the case with all those large states that are going to be casting their ballots for the National Convention delegates.
You know, and Bill, what do you think? Is there anyone or anything, you know, maybe some of these court cases that really can even knock Trump out of the top GOP spot?
Right now, there's no evidence that that can happen. I mean, he's been indicted 4 times on 91 counts. He's continually being attacked in the press, and every time there's a new filing in each of these cases, it gets national coverage, front page coverage. And right now, it just hasn't shown any sort of impact on his polling numbers. Right now, he looks like the prohibitive favorite. And I think these other candidates are sticking around to see if there's a conviction or some other substantial development in any of these cases. Does it actually impact his numbers? But the evidence right now points to it will not. The Republican primary voters like his agenda from his first term. They want to return to peace and prosperity.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.